Welcome to the Creation Gospel. This is the Spirit-Filled Family Series, and we are on the last segment of the series, which is the Spirit-Filled Wife. We've been looking at some difficult passages, especially in this day and age. It's kind of difficult to read things that talk about submission and obedience and that sort of thing. These are words, like we said, that the soul really doesn't like to hear the word no, wait, submit, obey. The soul tends to resist those sorts of things because they're constraining. And the soul is just full of energy. It's very dynamic. It's that primal part of us that we actually have in common with the beast. And it strives against the spirit, wanting to master the spirit, when we know that's not really our design as human beings. We're designed for the spirit, which is made in the image of Elohim, to master those strong urges of the soul, of the nephesh. And so as we deal with some of these words, we've tried to lend some insight into their actual meaning, and then into their context. We've not looked at such words in isolation, but we've matched them with some other texts that Peter and Paul wrote. Two married couples, two families. And what we realize is that while husbands were told to pay special attention to knowledge, to that spirit of sacrificial love, that women were warned that it's that spirit of reverence, the positive aspect of respect that they need to emphasize, that they need to work on. It's that place where he says, you need to pay attention for this because this could be a trouble area. And what we drew away from it is that if we fail to operate in the spirit of reverence, Yirat Adonai, then it's actually going to manifest itself with a spirit of fear, which is Yoreh. Also in Hebrew, fear has positive and negative aspects. So if we don't render the positive aspect of respect, then what we reap is the reward of the negative aspect, which is fear, terror, very negative. And we don't want those negative results. And we're warned within the text that when we obey, we can't do it with that negative aspect of fear. That relationship of mutual respect and mutual submission that they're talking about, it cannot occur when one partner is literally afraid of the other partner. It's only successful when the partners have a mutual respect for one another, and where sometimes this is a problem area for women. And we talked about the way that we're wired, the way that we're just naturally created and made, because we are created and made to be a helper for our husbands. And it's part of our makeup to want to improve and to build him, to increase his value, so to speak, as a human being, to increase the overall value of the marriage as we labor together in the kingdom. What that will often translate to, at least to the way he's hearing it, it will more translate like nagging instead of helping. I say help, you say nag. It's a matter of our perspective sometimes, but really rooted in the way that we're designed and made, and our different roles within the marriage. And so once we learn to respect that need within our husbands, that delivery of the message and the attitude of the message will likely determine whether he's hearing it as help or he's hearing it as an attempt to domineer over him, to control him. And we all know how we all get accused of that. If we give a suggestion, eventually if you give a suggestion, you're going to be accused of being a Jezebel. Which, that's just kind of a distraction tactic. But the Sabbath spirit, which is Yerat Adonai, it's the seventh spirit of Adonai, what the Sabbath tells us is to give it a rest. And we tend not to want to give it a rest when we're operating in that negative aspect of fear, because what we're actually fearing is our loss of control. We feel like we're giving over total control to someone else. And that's the special fear for the female in terms of, the anatomy, the physiology, the biology. The males have limitless opportunities to create, but the female, it's finite. We build and we reproduce by being very selective of the most viable opportunities, and then spending a lot of time building, 9 months building that child in security and limitation and protection. And when we see our counterpart in the male, because his creative process is different, we feel like things are out of control. He, on the other hand, is going to feel like we're enslaving him, we're chaining him, we're limiting him, we're stifling his creativity. When, the answer is together, we will take that creativity and we'll build something viable out of it. But when we're caught up in that negative aspect of fear, that fear of being out of control, like we're losing control, we're actually reacting, like we said in the last program, like Hagar. Paul uses that analogy between Sarah and Hagar. Sarah being the free woman, representing that free spirit from above. But Hagar represented the bondwoman, the slave woman, who does what she does in the relationship out of fear. And that's exactly what a slave does not have, control. It's at the mercy of the whims of other people. And so part of the reaction we may have when we feel like our husband is out of control, the spending is out of control, all these projects are out of control, this job hopping is out of control, those are legitimate fears. But on the other hand, if we are rendering respect in our messages and we're fearing Adonai, there's no reason to behave ourselves like a slave. And so what the slave will do, because the slave has no choice, when the slave is assigned something to do, a role to play, and it's very begrudging, because they weren't involved in the decision-making process. They were simply commanded to do something. Now, while our husband shouldn't be giving us orders like a slave, sometimes he's delivering the message in a gentle spirit, he's making a request, but yet we react like a slave. We get sarcastic or whatever. We mock. We ignore. And that's the behavior of a slave. And so if we're going to try to express what we think, we might call it criticism. And a certain amount of criticism is good, because criticizing is not always a negative thing either. It means we're analyzing. We're analyzing a situation. Some people, however, they're so egocentric that if you don't 100% agree with their opinion, they take it as negative criticism instead of analysis. They want to completely own not just the decision. Now, when it gets consequences they don't like, they tend to look around for partners. But they're really, their sense of who they are is really mixed up in whether you accept their decisions. And so there again, if we're being respectful when we give that information, rather than delivering it in a scolding way or a mocking way, why not just being honest and tell your husband what you're afraid of? If there's a behavior that's scaring you, if there's a habit that's scaring you, if there's a thought process that's scaring you that you think is not healthy, that you think is not conformed to the word of Adonai, then rather than first become mocking, taunting, sarcastic, or whatever, why not just tell him honestly what you're afraid of? And the importance of that, remember, with the message and the delivery, it's what he's hearing versus what you think you're delivering. And we all know that's a problem in communication, regardless of whether it's a husband or wife, just in a normal human interaction. The way we think we're delivering a message versus the way that someone is receiving the message, they're often drastically different. But if you're just giving orders, if you're just, they say that this negative delivery method, if he doesn't understand the point of your fear, because remember, it says you need to obey without any fear. All right? If you're going to do it, he needs to be able to remove those fears from you. That's part of the deal. Because if you obey just because you're afraid, there's no point in it. It's really not obeying that commandment. But it says if you obey him without any fear, then you are the children of Sarah. And so, number one, that might mean that, you know what, I have confidence that he's making this decision for my good. But it may also mean that I still have reservations, I still have fears that this is detrimental to our family. So let me tell him very humbly, very quietly, very meekly, what's really scaring me about this decision, this behavior, this habit. And he's much more likely to hear that honest expression of your fear than, just snapping at him. Because if you just snap your criticism, then ultimately it's just going to end up in a Jezebel sort of situation where you're just trying to control me. You're just trying to tell me what to do. And so we have to evaluate, is our criticism or is our complaining from fear? We need to express that. Don't just bottle it up and act like it's not there. It might be a legitimate fear that he can help with. There might be more information that he has. Or like the story I taught about the man who would just drive recklessly to just show his wife that he was in charge. Once it dawned on him that behavior really did scare her because she loved him and she didn't want him to be killed in a car wreck. Once he realized the source of the fear, that she wasn't just being Jezebel trying to dominate him and tell him every move to make and how to drive the car, see, that made a difference to him. He was hearing one thing and she thought she was delivering something else. And so if we have that fear, express it. If you say, if you continue these spending habits, we're going to lose our house in 3 months. That's what I'm afraid of. Because I'm thinking future. I know right now you're thinking we have to solve this immediate problem and put all this money on this immediate problem. But I'm thinking in 3 months we'll lose this house. If we don't address this. And so we need to sit down and figure out, what is your plan here? And there might be a part of the plan you don't know about. But that's where we have to open up dialogue and sometimes ask, is there more information than what I know so far that will help me not be afraid? And that's what 1 Peter was telling us, that we will do well when we can cooperate without any fear. So give him a chance. Say, help me here. I'm afraid. I need you to help me through these fears. And inviting him to help you through the fear rather than accusing him of bad motives, that's going to be much more effective. And, it might be said here, I know we've already talked about being yoked together with unbelievers, and Paul even went through that long chapter in 1 Corinthians 7, and part of those instructions had to do with, you might be betrothed to a person, but then if one of you comes to faith, then do you go ahead and marry? Now we know that we're unequally yoked. We may have agreed at this point when we knew it would be an equal yoke, but now it's clear that we will be unequally yoked. And so we know we don't all come from perfect situations. We may have been married before we became believers. It may be that only one spouse has come to believe for faith in Messiah Yeshua. And we know that that makes for a lot of trouble in a marriage, or it can. And so if you have the opportunity, and this is something you can express to your daughters, it's something that daughters need to know. And it has to do with the ability to listen. You know, it was one things about my own husband that was so attractive is he had the ability to listen to people. He wasn't so invested in his own opinion he couldn't hear anything else. And to me, that rocked in terms of a character trait. How many people really listen to you when you disagree? How many people really listen to those who disagree? Or do they just take it personally and turn it into a competition? And so when your daughters are entertaining the idea of courtship, that's a quality that you really need to instill in her as something to look for. A man who will listen to you, if you can identify that man up front before you invest a lot of time in the courtship, or God forbid you invest a lot of time in the marriage and you find out years and years later he's never going to listen. You know, he's not. But it's something you can test even in the courtship. You know, when you're becoming acquainted with one another, you can find out very early on if he is the type of person who will listen. You know, and especially in the courtship, you should be on your best behavior. And if you're going through this process, kind of getting to know one another, is this a possibility? Somebody I want to spend my life with? You know, somebody I'm going to be stuck in a yoke with for a long time. Well, if he can't remember something you told him 5 minutes ago, if you can't really hold a conversation for him checking his cell phone, you might consider moving on. Because if he can't give you 5 minutes of his undivided attention now when he's on his best behavior, imagine what he's going to be 5 years from now when he's on his less than best behavior. That's not a starting place, right? Having his focus for 5 minutes is, that's a starting place. And so when you see up front that you've given him information and then a day later he can't recall it, that's an indication. That's something to keep track of. If he can't put down his cell phone, if he can't quit texting, if he can't quit checking the game scores in courtship, you can bet he won't quit after you're married. It's better to start out in an equal yoke because courtship is our indication of best behavior. And it's your indication of how much he values you as a woman. Because see, if he starts writing you out of his life script before you're ever married, that's a clue. Can he hear you? If you were to tell him, the way you're driving is scaring me. I feel like you're going to hurt yourself. You're going to hurt our kids. See, if he cannot hear what you're saying before you're married, he may not hear those things after you're married. It may tell you right then how much he will value your opinion. Because if everything is based on mutual submission and mutual cooperation as we're being taught in the texts, then he's going to have a hard time rendering you the value that you need in order to deliver those messages that are your part of the equation in a marriage. Because if he can't hear you in your courtship, give it a year and you can tell him 10 times. He won't remember. He'll forget your anniversary. He'll probably touch the remote control more than he touches you. You can bet he'll touch the cell phone more than he touches you, because he's already demonstrated to you his priorities and where he assigns value. And so have at least as much sense as Rebecca. You know, Rebecca married Isaac sight unseen. How did she know that Isaac thought she was valuable? How did she know she would be valued by that family, having never laid eyes on anyone? Well, look at the cost of the gifts that Abraham's servant gave Rivkah. The value of those gifts that he brought to her told her that that potential bridegroom placed great value upon her. In fact, one time Isaac got caught because he loved his wife and he was caressing her. She was something that was valuable to him. We're affectionate toward the things that we value. Don't settle for a cheap date. That is, don't settle for a thoughtless man. If he can't render value to you in the courtship process, it's not going to get better. He'll be exponentially worse as a thoughtless husband. Right? So, knowing how to look for evidence that he values you at the beginning can save you so much grief later. You know, and that's the thing to remember. If he values us, it is so easy to submit to him. When you know somebody values you or your opinion, when they in turn request your cooperation, isn't it so much easier to give it to them? If we start up front finding that person that knows how to render value, we make it so much easier on ourselves later. When there's those testing times when we're going to have to render value to him, maybe we're just not feeling it that day. We just completely disagree. But it's a good indication. If I feel like you value me, then it's so much easier for me to surrender. Because our husbands, they're our foundation. They're like our Passover in the Moedim. In the cycle of the Moedim, Passover is kind of that, everything's built off of that. In fact, even at Sukkot, we keep Sukkot, it says, in remembrance of when he brought us up out of Egypt at Passover. Passover is that kind of thing that it separates us from the rest of the world. I mean, you can tell at Passover who's on what side in terms of the commandments of Elohim and keeping his appointed times. You know what time it is, and he knows where his people is at that time. And so he separates us from the rest of the world, and he consecrates us to him for good. And that's the way our husbands are. They separate us from the rest of the world, and they consecrate us to them for good. The husband is the initiator of good, and the women are the responders to good. And since he is an initiator, she needs to be able to see herself as a receiver and a follower. As I said, it's difficult sometimes because women are very much givers. They give with loving kindness and mercy, and they will give and give and give, and just beyond exhaustion, especially when it comes to taking care of their families. But sometimes she needs to see herself or be capable of seeing herself in certain situations as the receiver and the follower. And the thing about being a receiver, and again, we can look in the physical realm and see a picture of how it also works in spiritual realms. If the female, if her very being is geared toward being a receiver, one thing we have to cultivate is a sense of being grateful for the gift. But in order for there to be a gift, there has to be an empty space. There has to be a vacuum of need. And when a wife is so self-sufficient that her husband doesn't think she needs anything from him, it's going to be really difficult for him to be the initiator of good if he feels like it's not going to be welcomed. And so if we can't receive from our husbands and receive gratefully, that's the whole key to understanding receiving, then there's no way that we can ultimately achieve that Shabbat rest within our marriage, because wives cannot do all the giving. They have to learn how to receive sometimes, and sometimes that's harder than giving. You know, it's better to give than to receive. It's also easier to give than to receive on one level, but then on another level, it's harder to empty yourself. Because once you empty yourself and you receive something, then the attribute that follows after is gratitude for that gift. And so just being grateful is a key. If we learn how to be grateful to our husbands, even for little things. Baby, I thank you for taking out the trash today. I was so busy and that trash was running over and you caught it just in time. Thank you. Or that other side of us might say, well, that was your job. Why should I congratulate you for doing your job? Two different attitudes. Thank you. I so appreciate it. It doesn't matter whether you should have done it or not. That's irrelevant. If you're wanting to build that relationship and to learn how to receive from another person, then learn how to say thank you. I appreciate you. That was a valuable contribution in my life today. And that's the thought question that I want to leave you with before the break. A receiver is not a taker, but a receiver. What is the difference? I'll say it again. A receiver is not a taker, but a receiver. What is the difference? There's a little thought question for you to chew on during the break. I'll see you when we come back.
Shalom, guys. This is Matthew Vanderels over at Hebraic Roots Network. Guys, we continue broadcasting these teachings of Yeshua, of Torah, to all nations by support by viewers like you. We'd ask you, if you currently do not support HRN, prayerfully consider sending us a one-time donation or maybe even a monthly donation to HRN so we can continue supporting the nations with the gospel of Yeshua. It's up to you, guys. It's up to you to keep this message going, and we thank you for that. Shalom.
Welcome back. Well, how'd you do with your thought question? What is the difference between a taker and a receiver? Well, I hope what you came up with was something like somebody who takes isn't grateful. They believe they're entitled. But a receiver is grateful. They have that attribute of gratitude. And so these attributes like gratefulness, humility, and part of that is forgiveness. In fact, according to researchers on brains and things, when we talk about the attribute of gratefulness, attribute of humility, and the attribute of forgiveness, those three things, they say that they arise from the same place in the human brain. And if we think about that, they're very much interconnected. If I don't have humility, I could never be grateful. And if I don't have the humility to be grateful, then I could never be grateful for the forgiveness that's been given to me, and therefore I could not give forgiveness to another. And so that makes sense. Everything is starting with that basis of humility, which goes back to that foundational spirit of Adonai, reverence, respect. In order to respect somebody, you have to be humble, because when you respect them, you're elevating that other person. and you're lowering yourself. You choose to lower yourself. It's not forced. You choose to lower yourself to give that other person that respect. And so with receiving, if I'm humble, if I'm meek, if I have the spirit of reverence, then I can be grateful. I do not feel entitled for what you gave me. I don't feel like you should have done that, or you ought to have done that. I am simply grateful that you did do that. And understanding that forgiveness can only arise when those characteristics are in place, humility and gratefulness, then even within the marriage, it's much easier for me to be a forgiving spouse, because we all make mistakes. But it requires us to create an empty space, wives, that a husband wants to fill. And like Paul said, it might sound like I'm talking about physical things, but I'm talking about spiritual things. We have to have that empty space. And when they sense that there is an empty space within us, that there is a humility within us, that there is a gratefulness within us, then that is going to increase their desire to fill that empty space, because actually that's part of the way they're made too. They were made to fill that empty space when we make room for them. But if we're not making room for them, if we are all sufficient and we have it all together and we are all confident, then the message we might be sending is, I don't need you, I have everything I need. And I can't imagine there being anything much more frustrating for a husband than to feel like he has nothing to give to his wife. I know what I would feel like if I had a husband and I felt like there was nothing I could give to him that was of value. And so we have to be really careful about transmitting, I don't need you, I don't need that, I'll do it myself, we get along just fine without you. Sending those sorts of messages are really counterproductive, because if we look at our example, Yeshua, it said that he emptied himself to be formed in the flesh. Now, if that's not mystical, I don't know what is. But Yeshua, who was part of the all-sufficiency of the Father in the heavens, in the ultimate act of humility, he emptied himself. And that, ladies, is something that's sometimes not so easy to do, because we might have a sense of entitlement. We might have that sense of, this is what you should have done. Why haven't you been doing this all along? What, you expect me to thank you for that? You expect me to be grateful for that? Remember, little bites. We have to be happy with small accomplishments sometimes. And part of that for ourselves is learning to say thank you for things for which maybe we might feel we were entitled. But as we grow in humility, as we grow in the reverence of Adonai, you become more and more grateful for any act of kindness that someone else does for you. You know, it's one of those things that we can just say the word thank you, but if someone senses that we actually are thankful for whatever they have done. I mean, you can practice on a waiter or a waitress in a restaurant, or server, I don't know, they've got different names. But if that attendant, that server brings you something just for the sake of practice. You know, sometimes it's easier to practice on a stranger than your own spouse if it's going to feel unusual, if it's not been your practice to be really grateful for even mundane things. Practice on somebody. And if they bring you a glass of ice water and they didn't stick their finger in it, try a heartfelt thank you. I am so glad I have a glass of cold water here without someone's fingernail in it. And you can train yourself to do those things. And the more that you say those things with intention, the more you will actually begin to feel them. I am grateful for a glass of cold water. Now next time, let's try not getting our hair in it, But at any rate, practice on the little things. Learn to be grateful if he took the trash out. Learn to be grateful if he gets home on time from work instead of going to Lowe's to buy another tool or whatever. Find those opportunities to express gratefulness. Maybe you won't feel it the first time, but the more you practice it, the more you can express that gratefulness, because gratefulness is actually the symptom that you're learning to humble yourself and be a receiver, to be like Yeshua, to empty yourself. One of the characteristics of humility, one of the characteristics of Yirat Adonai, that seventh spirit of reverence, respect, is the ability to rest in someone else's work or accomplishment. And some people are kind of perfectionists, and they'll go behind and fix things that other people have done. And if they don't see it, that's one thing, but if they turn around and see you fixing what they've done, then they're going to feel disrespected. And so with our husbands, sometimes when they do things, maybe it doesn't exactly meet our standards. And so we have to be really careful. Number one, say thank you anyway, because they got close. They tried, And if they got close, be grateful. Next time they might get closer and closer and closer if they feel the encouragement of your gratitude. Hey, I'm just glad you tried. Nobody else has really tried to go out of their way for me today. Thank you. Maybe he loaded the dishwasher all wrong and you had to completely redo it. You know what? Wait till he's not in the kitchen before you completely redo it, and just say thank you. You know what? And if he wants to help tomorrow night, say, I am so grateful that you want to help again. It really helped last night. Let me show you a little secret I found. This helped me, it might help you. Rather than saying something like, could you please just get out of the kitchen? I can get it done faster myself. I don't want to come behind you and redo everything. We can do things without thinking, and then you're like later, oh my goodness, that was really insulting. I didn't mean to be disrespectful, but you can't get the words back. But what you can do is try to do better next time. What you can do is try to be more grateful next time for an effort, for an attempt. It's just like maybe he wants to watch a big game and he wants you to watch it with him, and you couldn't care less. I mean, I sit there and have a running commentary on how attractive the football uniforms are. I'm like, well, we have to admit that the Seahawks year after year, very tasteful, in their color coordination and so forth, but the Redskins really have to do something about that red. Okay, at least I'm there with him. I'm at his side. I don't really care about the quarterback stats or all that, but I am grateful that he would want my presence there with him watching that ball game. A lot of men don't. They would rather just have a bunch of other men in the room eating popcorn and chips. But the idea that he would want me by his side while he does something he enjoys, which is watch a game every now and then. All right, I'm going to make an effort, be grateful for the invitation and make the most of it, and maybe do some other stuff on the side. But try to engage. Do the best you can. Learn to rest and be grateful, because that is such a life skill. That's not just a marriage skill. Grateful people succeed in relationships because it suggests that there's humility there. When we come away with the idea, I've got one thing left to learn in life, and it doesn't depend on whether the silverware is right on the table. That it's funny, every now and then I'll get behind on Shabbat, getting ready for Shabbat, and my husband will try to help me out by setting the table, and I don't know that I've ever seen him do it right. very predictable, but I'm also very grateful. He's trying to help. Why in the world would I go behind him and criticize that, well, I'm sorry, sweetie, but the spoon doesn't go there. You know, the knife and the spoon, they go over here and this goes that way. You know what? I'm just glad we have something to eat with. And if he's not looking, maybe if he steps out, I might go back and rearrange the silverware. He'll never know anyway. But if we can express gratitude, thanks for trying to help me out. I'll let myself get behind today. Be grateful even when there's an effort. And you'll see how much more he'll want to give. The more you sow gratitude, the more you're going to reap the gifts. Because he wants to give to you. He's wired that way. And if that part of him is shut down, there's a disconnect. Sometimes they need to learn how to release that sense of giving. But sometimes it's because we've put gates up, gates of criticism, where we're not allowing them to give without judgment. And when we open that gate and it becomes safe to give to us again, you might just open the floodgates. You might have to practice a little bit. Like I say, because so many times things come out of our mouths without thinking. We're in a rush. We're living in an age where we're always rushed. There's always something to do. Rest more. And not just physically. Yes, rest more physically, because it will give you more clarity in your busy times when you will take the proper rest times, including Shabbat. But sometimes just rest. Quit trying to fix it. Just like Adam had to rest and work, he didn't do. We're going to have to learn how to rest sometimes in our husband's work without adding to or taking away from those gifts. He wants to nourish you. Just like Yeshua wanted to nourish his body. And that was a gift that we didn't deserve. And so when our husbands want to nourish us and they want to edify us and do nice things for us, it may not be the exact thing we wanted. And we might be thinking, well, if you really wanted to do something nice for me, why didn't you ask me what I wanted? Instead of just assuming you knew what I wanted. Maybe the last thing I want today is red roses. You know, how about washing some dishes for me? That's not the attitude. Accept whatever nourishment he knows how to give and accept it as something that's undeserved. And, you know, it's kind of funny sometimes we can look at examples of other things. There's 39 categories of work in the tabernacle. This is coming out of Jewish law. And on the basis of those 39 melachot, they have constructed the Shabbat laws. This is how you rest on Shabbat. And sometimes when our husbands work within the marriage, we feel compelled to go behind him and fix it. And so that's the thing. You don't want to add to, you don't want to take away from. All right? So adding to his gift means, okay, here's the gift, great, thanks. Now let me fix it. Be careful doing that. Wait till he's not looking to fix it. Don't disrespect him. Make him feel valued and that his contribution is valued. Also means don't take away from the gift. Don't diminish the gift. Don't make him feel as though it's not enough. It's not what I wanted. It will never be enough. And, you know, just if you gentlemen are watching, let me go ahead and clue you in. It never will be enough because we're visionaries. We're always looking beyond right now. We're always looking toward the present and calculating what it takes to achieve those goals in the future. So no matter what you do today, it probably never will be enough. All right? So don't take that personally. All right? But ladies, as much as you can, please, when he gives you that gift of care, that gift of value, whatever it might be a little text. I get this little text every morning when I'm on the road. It just says, "Morning, love." You know what? Thank you. You know, the first thing on his mind in the morning is me, even when I'm not there. That's a gift, because not everybody is like that. Not everybody gets one of those texts when they're on the road. So don't diminish, don't take away from his gift. Don't make him feel as though that's not enough. You know, I could say, "Well, you're sending me a text, why don't you call me?" No, the text is great. That's plenty. I'm grateful. It's good. And that's what we have to learn to say to our husbands. It's great. It's sufficient. It's wonderful. Thank you. Because the frustration and the complaining, it a lot of times occurs when we're trying to fix our husbands. You know what? There probably is a lot he could do better. But if you think about the motivation behind the complaining, don't excuse it just because we are the Azer Kenegdo, and yes, we are wired to help them, to help build them, help build their house. Don't use that an excuse when possibly the source of the frustration and the source of the complaining is because we actually feel like we deserve to be treated better. You ever say things like, "I just don't need this. I don't deserve this. What did I do to deserve this?" Well, think about it. If a lot of our frustration and a lot of our complaining is stemming from the fact that we feel like we deserve to be treated better, where is that actually coming from? It's not coming from a spirit of reverence, respect. It's not coming from an attitude of gratitude. And so when we communicate things, a lot of times we're just not sensitive to the Holy Spirit when we give those communications. And if we're not being sensitive to the Holy Spirit in the communication, and sometimes even if we are, but especially if we're not, if the source of our frustration, if the source of the complaint is not originating in the spirit realm, you can bet they're going to become defensive, or you can bet they will tune out. It depends on with their personalities how they deal with it. They might strike back, or they might just tune you out and become numb and not listen to you at all, which is going to make it 10 times harder to get the message through the next time. But be careful that you self-examine when you're just so frustrated and you didn't do this and you didn't do that. Do you really feel like you deserve better? Do any of us really deserve better? We have to examine the source of that. If that gift, if that work that the husband is doing and trying to give to you is not up to your standard, just say thank you anyway. He's much more likely to try again than if you pick the thing apart. If nothing else, point out the part of what he did that you liked and just ignore the mistakes. It's like, thank you for setting the table. I'm ignoring the fact that the silverware is all out of whack. This is what I liked. Thank you. And if I never get one thing more than that, if the forks and the knives and the spoons are never in the right place, I'm still going to be grateful. Because there may come a time where I can look back in my memory bank and I will say, I wish I had one more opportunity to look at those knives and forks in the wrong place, because that person may not always be there to make the mistakes. I would rather have them in my life making those funny, silly little mistakes than destroy that person with my criticism and be sorry for it later because I wasted time criticizing. It's important for us as women to help men understand how to listen. Sometimes they don't have a clue that they're being bad listeners. Because remember, we're made differently. We emphasize different things, and personality plays a huge role in that. And so for men, like I said before, don't overwhelm them with tasks or information. And the same holds true for conversation. A lot of times we want to talk to our husbands. They're just not as verbal as we are. Or in certain cases, we're kind of switched. I'm less of a talker, more of a doer. And my husband, he likes to talk through things. And there's a good give and take there. But a lot of men, they're really overwhelmed by a lot of conversation, especially, if we've been at work all day. A lot of men are just talked out by the time they get home, and a lot of women are just getting warmed up. Especially if that's the first grown-up she's visited with today. If she's been home with the kids all day, she wants to talk and have a grown-up conversation. But that can be overwhelming for our husbands. And so a lot of times, if it's a really serious talk, and they hear that dreaded phrase, we need to talk. All right, they're just going to go cold from their head to their toes. That's the scariest thing in the world for them to hear, because part of it is we never know when to stop the conversation. And sometimes it's not really a conversation, it's a monologue. All right? And men don't always understand that sometimes we just want to talk, and we don't need them to fix the problem. We just want them to have a listening ear and be sympathetic. We don't expect them to go out and fix something for us. See, with them, the talking should lead to, okay, now here's what we're going to go do. And for us, we're just talking. Just let me vent. Just let me talk through this, because sometimes for some people, males and females, they need to talk through a problem. They're not necessarily wanting you to fix it. Just let them talk through it. So rather than force him to sit there in the chair and think, oh my goodness, when is this ever going to end? Maybe you can make a deal up front. If you can give him a time limit, you will see so much more cooperation. If he's one of those that just kind of glazes over after a few minutes, or he actually glazes over when you say we need to talk, then make a deal with him. Because he's sitting there like, oh gosh, when is this going to end? Well, give him a time limit. Say, okay, I need to talk to you for the next 15 minutes. Can you give me 15 minutes? Now to him, that is a bargain. It might be 10 minutes, whatever you think you need to deliver the information. Now there's going to be time, don't limit yourself. I mean, you should be able to have a conversation with your husband without saying you'll only have to listen to me for 15 minutes. But with those really serious things, that's usually the signal, we need to talk, that it's not going to be just a fun conversation. But on those serious talks, if you can give him a time limit, can you listen to me? It's 8 o'clock. Could you give me till 8:20? You might think you deserve 10 hours, but trust me, a good verbal personality, they will talk through that same story 15 times. And I don't know why they do that. It's like that little wire's touching the part of their brain that says talk, and it just doesn't know how to come off. But those more verbal personalities, they can just keep rehashing like I am right now. And so give him the time limit. It's 8 o'clock. Give me till 8:20. He's going to agree to that probably much more happily and be a better listener to you. And one of those serious emotional conversations that he thinks could go on indefinitely, now he's got the time limit. And you know what? He's like, I can sit here and put up with anything for 20 minutes. If that's all I have to do. And that kind of takes the pressure off of him. And with that pressure off, it might open up his ears. Just remember, the way he's made, he has difficulty focusing that energy in one place for very long. And, it explains why he drives you crazy channel surfing or watching Red Zone, where he's watching 6 ball games at one time. There's some technique here, ladies. And in the next program, we're going to look at the techniques that Queen Esther used in order to gain her husband's ear. She didn't just want him to listen to her. She wanted him to hear her. And by hearing, it's just like in Hebrew when we say, we will do, we will hear, it means we will do something. We will hear it, do it. She didn't just want the king to listen. She wanted him to hear what she was actually saying and then do something. And so if you want to bring your husband to that place where he will not just hear you, but do something, you're going to have to chunk it down. Like I said, give me 20 minutes. Give me 10 minutes. Here's a list of 3 things. Do it in small bites and he'll come around. We'll see you next time.